When I entered that restaurant, the environment was delicately lit, as if everything had been planned to create the perfect setting for a forbidden romance. There were candles flickering on the tables, wine glasses clinking under the soft glow of the chandeliers, and the sound of discreet laughter filling the space. But none of that affected me. I already knew what I was about to see. The knot in my stomach tightened as I walked, each step echoing like a hammer in my mind. She was there. Sitting at a table by the window, smiling. A smile that, for years, I thought was mine. The kind of smile that warmed the soul and brightened my darkest days. But now, that same smile cut me like glass. And he was sitting in front of her. The man who should just be your boss. Your superior. Your mentor. But there, between glasses of wine and long looks, it was clear that he was much more than that. She picked up the wine glass and smiled at him as if the entire world had disappeared around them. I could see her fingertips touching his on the table. An almost imperceptible touch, but one that screamed betrayal. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept walking. When I stopped next to them, her smile froze. It was as if time had stopped. Her eyes widened, first in shock, then in fear. And then came despair. The color drained from his face as he looked at the ring I held in my palm. I held it out, letting it shine in the golden light of the restaurant. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Did you forget that? My voice was cold, controlled, but I could feel the inner tremor struggling to break free. The man in front of him looked at me, confused. He didn't understand who I was, but she did. She knew exactly who I was. And in that instant, she also knew that everything was over. She stood up so quickly that her chair scraped on the floor, drawing stares from the other tables. "This is not what it seems," he said, almost pleading. "No." I leaned into her, feeling the heat rise to my face. "So what is it? A business dinner?" She swallowed hard, her gaze darting between me and the man who now shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Please, let's talk." "Not here." But I wasn't there to talk. I was there to watch as everything she built crumbled before her eyes. She tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. "To talk? How did you talk to him? Or did what you did not need words?" Her boss, finally understanding the gravity of the situation, stood up as well, trying to maintain an authoritative posture. "I think that's enough." He put himself between the two of us. "Do you think so?" My voice was lower, but filled with anger. "Because I think this has barely started." She tugged on his arm. "Stay out of this, please." But he didn't stay. He tried to confront me, he tried to justify himself, but every word that came out of his mouth only made the situation worse. And I let him speak. I let him stumble over his own lies until the silence between us became unbearable. It was then that I gave her the ring. I just reached out my hand and dropped it on the table between us. The metallic sound echoed louder than any scream could echo. And she knew. I knew I had lost everything in that instant. But what she didn't know, and what I would only discover later, was that the man beside her wasn't as firm as she imagined. It wouldn't be long before he left her too. So that he would run away when the consequences started knocking on his door. She tried to run after me when I left the restaurant. I could hear his footsteps and his voice calling me. But I didn't turn around. I couldn't look back. Because at that moment, I knew that if I did, all the pain and humiliation I felt would boil over at once. And I couldn't let that happen. Not there. Not in front of so many witnesses. But what no one saw was what came next. Her breakdown. The destruction that followed. And the way I, even though I tried to move forward, kept getting pulled back into the eye of the storm. Because betrayals like this don't end with dinner. They leave deep scars. And deep down, I knew that night was just the beginning. Welcome to the channel where the truth about cheating is exposed bluntly. Here, we do not support and never justify any type of betrayal. The stories presented are fictitious, but they carry a powerful message: betrayal destroys lives, trusts and families. Get ready to dive into an intense narrative, full of emotions and unexpected twists. Hold on tight, what you are about to hear will mess with you. Now, take a deep breath, and enjoy the story. Michael adjusted his tie in front of the bathroom mirror, his eyes fixed on his reflection. He was always a man who valued his appearance. Well-groomed beard, carefully aligned hair and a discreet but striking perfume. He worked at a technology company, where his analytical talent and leadership skills made him stand out over the years. He was not an extravagant man, but he liked to take care of himself. And today, more than ever, I wanted to look impeccable. The clock showed 7:15 p.m. Dinner that night was nothing special, at least, that's what he thought until a few hours before. He had planned to go out to dinner with his wife, Emily, something they hadn't done in months. Their marriage, to outsiders, seemed stable. They had a comfortable home, an 8-year-old daughter named Sophie and a peaceful financial life. Emily worked as a marketing manager at a well-regarded company and, despite her hectic routine, she always found time to take care of her home and family. But lately, Michael had been noticing something different. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but Emily was further away. Her smile seemed shorter, less natural. And his absences had become more frequent. Always with plausible excuses: meetings, corporate events, last-minute campaigns. He tried to keep the bad thoughts away. Emily had always been dedicated and loving, and he felt guilty for doubting her. That night, however, he felt a weight on his chest. I couldn't tell if it was nervousness or just a reflection of the stress accumulated at work. Michael took his wallet and car keys. As he left the bathroom, he found Sophie in the living room, drawing. "Are you and Mom going out today?" she asked without looking up from the paper. "Yes, my love. But we'll be back soon. And Aunt Claire will stay with you, okay?" Sophie nodded and continued drawing. Michael looked at her for a moment longer. She was the reason he worked so hard, why he fought to keep his family together. He promised himself that he would do everything he could to continue being the father she deserved. Emily came down the stairs in a tight black dress that highlighted her curves. Her blonde hair was down, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Michael felt his stomach drop at the sight of her. She looked beautiful. Almost unreal. "Wow," he said, forcing a smile. "Thanks," she replied, adjusting her earring as she watched him. In the early years of their marriage, Emily used to blush at his compliments. But now, there was a distance in her eyes, as if the connection they had before was slowly slipping away. Michael didn't mention anything. He decided to leave it to talk after dinner. They left the house and drove to the reserved restaurant. It was a sophisticated place, with ambient music and soft lights. The kind of place where they used to celebrate birthdays and anniversaries. But that night, Emily seemed restless. "Everything is fine?" Michael asked as she fumbled with the napkin folded in her lap. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" He nodded, but was not convinced. The waiter arrived with the wine and, for a few minutes, the atmosphere softened. They talked about Sophie, school, and a new project at Emily's work. But Michael noticed that she avoided looking into his eyes for a long time. Dinner continued, and Michael found himself noticing the details that had always enchanted him about her: the way she moved her hands while she spoke, the delicate way she laughed when she felt uncomfortable. But she also noticed the little signs of withdrawal, short answers, averted glances, and a nervous touching of the wedding ring. The feeling that something was wrong grew. Michael remembered the nights when Emily came home late from work, exhausted, but always with her cell phone within reach. Or the times when she seemed more concerned about answering messages than paying attention to him. He tried to ignore these thoughts, but they came back strong. Between sips of wine and exquisite dishes, Michael realized that the silence between them was louder than any conversation. It was as if they both knew there was something hanging in the air, but no one had the courage to say it. Emily smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. What it was? You look strange today. Strange? Maybe it's just work. Or maybe it's something else. She frowned, but didn't ask what he meant. And Michael noticed that she was avoiding the conversation. He looked at her ring, shining in the soft table light. A ring that represented promises made 10 years ago, promises of love and fidelity. Promises he wondered if were still true. Emily looked away and picked up the wine glass. Aren't you going to ask about last week's event? Michael looked up. It should. She hesitated for a second. It was just a business dinner. Nothing else. He didn't respond. He just nodded, but inside he felt his stomach turn. Dinner continued, and Michael struggled to maintain his composure. Emily has always been an independent woman. From the beginning of the relationship, he made it clear that he needed his own space. And Michael respected that. But lately, that space seemed to have outgrown it. He began to wonder if he was still a part of her life or if he had already been pushed aside without realizing it. When the waiter brought the check, Michael realized he had barely touched the food. His head was racing. Emily, on the other hand, seemed relieved to be getting to the end of the night. On the way back home, silence took over the car. Emily looked out the window, as if she were somewhere else. Michael wanted to ask what was going on, but fear of the answer stopped him. When they arrived, Sophie was already asleep. Michael watched Emily climb the stairs and disappear into the bedroom. He stayed in the room, looking at the ring on his finger. Something was wrong. And he knew that sooner or later the truth would come out. He just didn't know if he was ready to listen to her. Michael spent the next few days trying to ignore the suffocating feeling that was growing inside him. The image of Emily at that dinner, restless and disconnected, wouldn't leave his head. He wondered if he was exaggerating, if his insecurity was manufacturing problems that didn't exist. But no matter how much she tried to push the thoughts away, they came back with more force whenever Emily left early or arrived late. The days turned into silent nights. Emily spent hours on her cell phone or computer, always justifying that she was solving something at work. Michael tried to remain calm, but he felt the distance between them increasing with each interrupted conversation or unanswered hug. One Wednesday, while Emily was taking a shower, her cell phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. Michael hesitated. He had never felt the need to invade her privacy. He trusted his wife. At least until that moment. But something changed in him when he saw the name on the screen, Daniel. His heart raced. Daniel was Emily's boss. Michael knew the name but had never met him in person. He knew that Emily spoke of him often, always praising his ideas and leadership. But now, seeing his name appearing on the screen late at night gave him a pang that he couldn't ignore. Before he could decide whether to answer or not, the call dropped and a message appeared on the screen. Looking forward to tomorrow. I can't wait to see you again. Michael's stomach turned. He dropped his cell phone as if it had been burned and walked away, breathing heavily. He tried to convince himself that it meant nothing. It could be a harmless comment, a misinterpretation. But the feeling of betrayal had already been planted. That night he couldn't sleep. Emily lay down next to him, turning on her back like she had been doing lately, and he stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her breathing. He felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on his chest. The next morning, Emily got ready more carefully than usual. She chose a new dress and used a different perfume. Michael watched everything in silence, fighting the urge to confront her. Any important events today? He asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Just a meeting at the end of the day. I'll need to stay later. He nodded, but inside he felt as if her every word was a blade cutting through the trust he was still trying to hold on to. As Emily walked out the door, Michael made a decision. He took the car keys and decided to follow her. He felt guilty at first, like he was invading her privacy, but the guilt was soon replaced by cold determination. He needed to know. He followed her car to the city center. Emily parked in front of an elegant restaurant, the same one they had dined at a few weeks ago. Michael parked a safe distance away and watched as she entered. Minutes later, Daniel arrived. Michael recognized the man from the description Emily had given, tall, well-combed gray hair, wearing an impeccable suit. He entered the restaurant and, through the large glass window, Michael saw the two of them hugging each other. The sight made his blood run cold. He tried to rationalize what he saw. It could just be a business meeting. But as he watched, he saw Daniel hold Emily's hand for a moment longer than was appropriate. He saw her smile, the same smile that was just his before. Michael stayed in the car, hands tight on the steering wheel. He felt his heart beating so hard that it seemed to echo in his ears. He saw the two of them sit at a more private table, away from the windows. As much as I wanted to go in and confront them, I knew I needed proof. I needed something concrete to face Emily later. Waited. Minutes turned into hours. When he finally saw Emily and Daniel leave the restaurant, laughing and exchanging knowing glances, the last hope that it was all a misunderstanding disappeared. They didn't go back to the office. Instead, they checked into a nearby boutique hotel together. Michael felt the floor collapse. He froze for a moment, unable to process what he had just seen. But then something inside him woke up. Anger took over, burning inside, as he fought the urge to get out of the car and confront them right then and there. But he didn't. Instead, he took out his cell phone and took photos. Photos of Emily entering the hotel, smiling. Photos that captured exactly what he needed to confirm what he already knew. When he returned home, he sat in the living room, looking at the photos on his cell phone. Each image seemed to cut deeper. He tasted the bitter taste of humiliation and pain, but also something darker. A growing desire for revenge. Emily arrived home late, as she had warned. Michael watched as she tried to act normal, but he could see the details, the slightly disheveled hair, the hastily retouched makeup, the smell of men's perfume mixed with hers. "How was your night?" he asked, his voice controlled. "Tiring," she replied, without looking at him. "I just want to take a shower and sleep." Michael nodded but said nothing more. He stood there, watching her go up the stairs as if nothing had happened. But for him, everything had changed. The pain still burned, but now it was accompanied by a plan. He knew he needed to wait for the right moment to act. And as he watched the bedroom door close, he decided that tonight would be the beginning of the end for Emily. She didn't know it yet, but everything she had built was about to fall apart. Michael was standing in the doorway of the restaurant, holding the ring tightly in his hand. The sound of cutlery and conversations around them seemed muffled, distant. All he saw was Emily. She held the wine glass, smiling at Daniel as if that moment was the height of her happiness. Michael felt his chest tighten, a mixture of pain and anger that made his entire body vibrate. He took a deep breath, trying to control himself, but his legs were already moving towards the table. Emily only noticed his presence when Michael's shadow fell across the table. Her eyes met his and, for a moment, everything stopped. The smile disappeared and was replaced by silent panic. She dropped the wine glass in such a hurry that the liquid ran down the white tablecloth. "Michael?" Her voice shook, but he didn't respond. He placed the ring on the table. The metallic sound as it touched the surface made Daniel look up, finally realizing who was there. "What is that?" Emily asked, trying to sound confused, but her voice betrayed nervousness. Michael crossed his arms and faced them both. "This is the end." She stood up so quickly that the chair hit the floor, drawing the attention of some people around her. Please don't do that here. Let's talk. To talk. How did you talk to him? Michael pointed to Daniel, who finally stood up, trying to maintain a firm posture. I think that's enough, said Daniel, placing himself between the two. Michael stepped forward, ignoring him. Do you have any idea what you just lost? Or do you still think you can get out of this without consequences? Emily tried to grab Michael's arm, but he pulled away. I can explain. It's not what you're thinking. So tell me, Emily. You and him. What is this here? A business meeting? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes began to fill with tears, but Michael didn't feel sorry. He felt angry. An anger that grew every second. I followed you. I saw you at the hotel. His voice broke a little, but he kept his tone steady. Don't try to lie to me. Emily started to cry. Daniel stepped back, looking uncomfortable. I'm so sorry, she finally said, her voice broken by sobs. I'm sorry, Michael. But he wasn't there to hear excuses. He needed more. I needed to understand why. Why? He asked, anger giving way to pain. Why did you do this to me? With our daughter? She put her hands to her face, trying to control her crying, but she couldn't respond. It was Daniel who broke the silence. I think I better go. Michael turned to him with a cold look. You're not going anywhere. Not until I finish. Daniel hesitated, but ended up walking away, leaving the two alone. Emily slumped in her chair, holding her head in her hands. I don't know what to say, she murmured. I ruined everything. Michael pulled out a chair and sat down facing her. I want the truth. Now. She lifted her face, her eyes swollen and red. It was a mistake. I was unhappy, feeling alone. The work, he was there. I didn't plan any of this. A mistake. Michael laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. You met him more than once. This is not a mistake. This is a choice. She started to shake her head. I regretted it. Interest. But I didn't know how to stop. Michael felt his chest tighten again. And now? What do you expect? That I forgive you? That we continue as if nothing had happened? Emily lowered her head. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know. He was silent for a few seconds, feeling the weight of the moment. You destroyed everything, Emily. Everything we built together. She cried and cried, but Michael couldn't feel compassion. Not at that moment. I'm going to leave, he said, getting up. When you come home, I won't be there anymore. Emily tried to hold him back, but he pulled away. Please don't go. Don't ask me to do that. You made the choice. Now live with it. He left the restaurant without looking back, leaving Emily there, destroyed. But as he walked down the street, he felt something different. A weight lifting off your shoulders. But Michael still didn't know that betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. The true revelation, the one that would change everything, was yet to come. And when it came to light, nothing would be the same. Michael left the restaurant with quick steps, but each movement felt heavy, as if he were dragging tons of disappointment. The cold wind bit his skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill that gripped his chest. He got into the car and stood there, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. Emily's face, her expression of despair, kept coming back to his mind, but he shook his head, trying to push it away. I needed to think, I needed to understand how I had gotten to that point. He started the engine, but didn't drive. He just stood there, staring into space. The cell phone vibrated. Emily. He ignored it. Then one more message. And another. With each vibration, I felt my stomach turn. Finally he picked up the device and unlocked the screen. "Please come home. We need to talk." He threw his cell phone on the passenger seat and accelerated. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay still. I needed air, distance. I needed to escape, even if it was for a few hours. He drove aimlessly until he stopped in a park. The place was practically empty, except for a couple sitting on a bench, laughing as if the world was perfect. Michael looked away. He sat on a bench further away and let time pass. The hours went by and finally he decided to go home. Not for Emily, but for Sophie. He couldn't leave his daughter without explanations. When she pulled into the garage, the lights in the room were still on. He opened the door slowly and found Emily sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen. She stood up as soon as she saw him, but he raised his hand, stopping any attempt to get closer. "I only came back for Sophie," he said, coldly. "Michael, please listen to me. I've heard everything I needed. Now I just want to grab some things and leave. Tomorrow, we can talk about the divorce." "Divorce?" She choked on the word, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "What else did you expect? That I would accept this? To pretend it didn't happen? I don't know. I just wanted to make things right." He let out a dry laugh. "To repair? You destroyed everything, Emily. This cannot be fixed." She collapsed onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. Michael turned and walked up the stairs. He picked up a suitcase and started putting clothes inside it. As he was zipping up, he heard footsteps in the hallway. "Please don't go yet." Her voice was shaking. "Emily, I have nothing else to talk to you about." "Yes, he has." She took a deep breath. "There's something you need to know before you go." He stopped, looking at her. "What?" "It's about Daniel." Michael frowned. "I already know about you too. I saw." "It's not just that." She approached. "He lied to me. Made me believe in things, Emily. I don't want to hear excuses." "These are not excuses." She raised her voice, desperate. "I need to tell you. I need to tell you what happened." Michael hesitated, but sat on the edge of the bed. "Speak quickly." She took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears. "At first, I really thought it was just a silly flirtation. Something I could control. But he was involving me. It made me feel special, like I was seen again." Michael clasped his hands on his knees, holding back his anger. "Continue." "I knew I was wrong, but I couldn't stop." And then he started talking about plans, about the future. He said I deserved more, that he could give me that. I was naive. Michael leaned forward. "Naive? You slept with him. This is not naivety." She nodded, letting new tears fall. "But he lied. He said he was going to ask for a divorce, that he loved me." "It's just what?" Michael was already losing patience. "Except he wasn't who I thought he was. He was using company money to pay for the meetings. Gifts, trips, everything paid for with the corporate card." Michael blinked, trying to absorb it. "And why should I care?" "Because he used me. When I threatened to break up, he started blackmailing me. He said if I told anyone, he would destroy my career. He said I was involved, that I could lose everything." Michael was silent, feeling the confusion increase. "And now? Now I don't know what to do. I messed up. Not just our marriage. I ruined my life." He shook his head. "You betrayed me. That's all that matters to me right now." She tried to grab his arm, but he pulled away. "Please, Michael. I need your help." He stood still for a moment, staring at her. Part of him wanted to leave and never look back. But another part, the one that still remembered the good times, felt a weight that was difficult to ignore. I don't know if I can. His voice was almost a whisper. She took a step forward. You were always the stronger of the two of us. I need this now. Michael took a deep breath, fighting the confusion in his mind. I didn't know what to do, but I knew that the story was far from over. And, for the first time, he felt that there was something deeper behind that betrayal. Something that could change everything. Michael left the room without looking back. Each step up the stairs felt heavier than the last, as if the floor was giving way beneath his feet. Emily's voice still echoed in his mind, begging, explaining, trying to justify the unjustifiable. But he was tired of listening. Tired of trying to make sense of the chaos she had created. As he went down to the living room, he passed a framed photo of the family. Sophie was smiling between him and Emily, holding a heart-shaped balloon. It was a moment of happiness frozen in time, a painful reminder of how different everything had once been. Michael looked away and headed towards the door, but stopped when he heard her footsteps coming down the stairs behind him. You can't just leave like that. Not after everything I told you. He turned slowly, keeping his distance. And what do you want me to do, Emily? Pretend nothing happened? Who accepts this humiliation? I'm not asking you to pretend anything. I need you to listen to me. I need you to understand what really happened. I already understand, he interrupted. You betrayed me. You threw it all away. She took a step forward, but Michael backed away. I'm not trying to justify anything. I just want you to see that I'm not the only one to blame. Daniel manipulated me. He used the power he had over me to control me. Michael clenched his fists. Don't put that on him. You chose. You decided to cross that line. Emily collapsed onto the couch, putting her hands to her face. I know. And I hate myself for it. But now he's threatening to destroy my career. He has messages, emails, things that could compromise me. Michael was silent for a moment, analyzing her words. Part of him wanted to ignore it all, let her deal with the consequences alone. But another part, perhaps the part that still loved her, couldn't let go completely. And what do you want me to do? He asked finally. She looked up, her eyes full of tears. I don't know. I just know I can't face this alone. Michael ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Do you really think I can just forget everything that happened and go around trying to fix this? I'm not asking you to forget, she said, her voice breaking. I'm asking you to help me. Just that. He stood still, feeling the weight of her words. As furious as he was, he couldn't ignore the fear in her eyes. The fear of losing everything. And Sophie? He asked finally. Did you think about her? How will this affect her? Emily shook her head. That's why I'm trying to resolve this before everything falls apart. I don't want her to know. Michael took a deep breath, fighting the avalanche of emotions. I won't let any of this affect Sophie. But don't think that means I forgive you. Emily nodded, wiping away her tears. I know. The two were silent for a moment, until Michael took his cell phone out of his pocket. Give me his number. What? Daniel's number. I will resolve this. She hesitated, but ended up dialing the number into his cell phone. Michael left the house and got into the car, feeling adrenaline pumping in his chest. I didn't know exactly what I would do, but I knew I couldn't let Daniel get away with it. When he arrived at the office where Daniel worked, he found the lights off. But his car was in the parking lot. Michael waited. He stayed in the car, watching, until he finally saw Daniel leaving the building. He got out of the car and called his name. Daniel turned around, surprised. Michael? He asked, frowning. We need to talk. Now is not a good time. I didn't ask if it was a good time. Michael's voice was firm. You will listen to me. Daniel looked around, as if looking for an escape route, but Michael stepped forward, blocking the way. You threatened Emily. Daniel smiled, but the smile was cold. Emily is an adult. She knew what she was getting into. Did she know? Or did you manipulate everything? Do you really believe she was a victim? Daniel crossed his arms. Because from what I remember, she didn't seem to be being forced into anything. Michael felt his anger rising. I didn't come here to discuss this with you. I came to make it clear that if you try to ruin her life, I will ruin you. Daniel took a step forward. And how do you intend to do that? I have photos. Videos. Messages. Michael lied, but kept his gaze fixed. I can end your career before you have the chance to destroy hers. Daniel backed away. You wouldn't do that. Try your luck. The silence between the two was heavy. Finally, Daniel let out an irritated sigh. What do you want? I want you to disappear. I want you to leave Emily alone. And I want her to continue her job without any problems. Daniel hesitated, but ended up nodding. All good. Michael pulled away, feeling momentary relief. But I knew that story wasn't over yet. When he returned home, he found Emily sitting on the couch, waiting for him. And then? He'll leave you alone. She let out a sigh of relief and began to cry. Thank you, Michael. I don't know what I would do without you. He stood still, looking at her. But that doesn't change anything between us. Her face contorted in pain, but she nodded. I know. Michael went up to his room and closed the door, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He had resolved the situation, but the betrayal was still there, like an open wound. And as he sat on the bed, he knew the real decision was yet to come. Michael woke up to the sound of the bedroom door closing gently. For a moment he was disoriented, not knowing what time it was or how long he had slept. The room was in darkness, lit only by the dim light coming from the hallway. He rubbed his eyes and felt the crushing weight of the events of the last few hours come crashing down on him again. He turned over in bed, but could not find comfort. His mind spun, reliving every word Emily said, every expression, every tear. He closed his eyes, but all he saw was the image of her sitting on the couch, curled up, like someone on the edge of an abyss. He hated what she had done. He hated what she had turned their marriage into. But at the same time, he hated the fact that he still cared. He got up and went down the stairs slowly. The silence in the house seemed louder than any sound. In the living room, he found Emily sitting in the same place as before, hugging her knees. She didn't notice his presence right away. When he realized, he hurriedly wiped his tears and stood up. I didn't know if you were still here, she said, her voice low and tired. I've been thinking, Michael replied, keeping a safe distance. Trying to understand how we got to this. She looked away, but didn't try to interrupt him. You asked for help, and I helped. But that doesn't erase what happened. I know. Her voice broke at the end of the sentence. No. You don't know. You don't know what it's like to trust someone for years and then suddenly have that trust crumble before your eyes. Emily looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. A mixture of guilt and despair, as if he was fighting something he couldn't control. I love you, Michael. I know it doesn't seem like it now, but I love it. He shook his head. Love doesn't do that. Love does not destroy. She took a step forward, but he backed away. Do you still see me as the man you married? Or have I become just another reminder of the mistakes you made? Emily started to respond, but he raised his hand to stop her. I don't want empty words. I want answers. Answers you haven't given me yet. She lowered her head, unable to look at him. I don't know what else I can say to fix this. Michael let out a heavy sigh. Maybe it can't be fixed. The two remained silent, the weight of those words filling the space between them. Finally, Emily looked at him again, her eyes filling with tears. I don't want to lose you. He stared at her for a long moment, trying to come up with an answer. But before he could say anything, he heard the sound of a car stopping in front of the house. Michael approached the window and saw Daniel getting out of the car. He felt his blood boil and, without thinking twice, he walked out the door. What are you doing here? He asked, walking quickly towards him. Daniel raised his hands in a defensive gesture. I just want to talk to Emily. You lost the right to speak to her the moment you decided to destroy her life. I didn't come to cause problems. I came to resolve it. Solve. Michael took a step closer. The only thing you're going to do now is leave. Emily appeared in the doorway, looking at the two of them. Daniel, go away. You know I can't do that. He looked at her. You know I have the proof. Michael felt his anger rising. Are you threatening her in front of me? That's not a threat. It's reality. Before she could react, Emily ran down the steps. I'm not afraid of you anymore. Do what you want, but I won't let you keep controlling me. Daniel seemed surprised by her determination, but quickly recovered. Do you really think he's going to stay by your side after all this? That's none of your business, Michael replied firmly. Daniel looked at the two of them for a moment and finally turned to leave. When he pulled away, Emily collapsed into Michael's arms, crying. I didn't know what to do, he said between sobs. I was so lost. Michael held her, feeling her body shaking. I know, he said finally. For a moment, everything was silent. Emily pulled away, wiping her eyes. I'm going to pay for this for the rest of my life, aren't I? Michael didn't respond. He just looked at her, knowing that no words could change what had happened. I just need to know one thing, she said. Do you still hate me? He hesitated. I don't know. Emily nodded slowly, as if she had already expected that answer. I'll understand if you decide to leave. Michael looked at her for a long moment before responding. I'm not going to make that decision now. She bit her lip and nodded. Thanks. The two went back into the house, but the silence between them was heavy. Michael knew that this was far from being resolved. There were open wounds that might never heal. But as hard as it was to admit, part of him wasn't ready to give up yet. While Emily went up the stairs, he stayed in the living room, staring into space. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I also knew I couldn't ignore what I still felt. And as much as he hated to admit it, there was still something inside him that made him want to fight, even when all seemed lost. Michael was standing in the living room, looking at the suitcases next to the door. The silence in the house felt heavier than ever. Emily was upstairs, packing the last of her things. She hadn't asked him to stay. Not after everything that had happened. Maybe because he knew there was nothing more that could be said to change the course of that story. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to organize his thoughts. The images of the last few days played in her mind like a disorganized movie, the dinner, the exposed betrayal, Daniel's threats, Emily's tears, and the confrontation in the parking lot. Everything seemed surreal, as if it hadn't been life itself, but rather a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. When Emily came down the stairs, carrying a bag, they exchanged a brief but intense look. There was regret in her eyes, but also resignation. It's all here, she said, almost in a whisper. Michael nodded, saying nothing. He walked to the door, opened it and gave her room to leave. She paused for a moment, as if waiting for him to say something. Perhaps asking, even in silence, for one last chance. But he remained motionless. Thank you for everything, she said finally. He just nodded again. She walked through the door, and he saw her walk to the car. As soon as she entered and left, Michael closed the door and leaned against it, releasing the air that seemed to have been trapped since the beginning of everything. He felt no relief. At least, not yet. He felt empty. A hole where there used to be trust, love and a life built with effort. In the following days, Michael devoted himself to Sophie. He explained as best he could that his mother needed time to sort out some things, without going into details. Sophie cried, asked if her mother was coming home, and Michael fought to remain calm. Emily called every night to talk to her daughter. She tried to keep her voice steady, but Michael knew she was crumbling inside. He heard the muffled sobs after Sophie hung up. But he never interfered. She knew that this was a path she would have to travel alone. Meanwhile, Daniel faced the consequences of his actions. The company where he worked opened an internal investigation, and the misuse of corporate money quickly came to light. He lost his job and, with it, his reputation. But that wasn't the end. His wife, upon discovering the betrayals and financial scandals, filed for divorce and took everything she could, leaving him with nothing but debts. He tried to contact Emily a few times, but she refused any kind of conversation. Michael followed everything from a distance. He knew that Daniel was reaping what he had sown, but that didn't bring him satisfaction. On the contrary, it only reinforced how much that situation had destroyed lives. Emily, in turn, tried to start over. She managed to keep her job after giving testimony in the investigation against Daniel and being released from any direct involvement in financial crimes. But the trust of colleagues and superiors was never the same. She became invisible, ignored in hallways and excluded from important meetings. More than that, she was consumed by guilt. Every attempt to apologize to Michael only seemed to increase the distance between them. She knew she had lost him, and that certainly gnawed at her. Michael, however, began to find small ways to move forward. He started running in the park, adopted a new hobby and, little by little, made room for meeting new people. One of these people was Claire, Sophie's old nanny, who continued to help in times of need. What started as casual conversations soon turned into something more. Claire was light, fun and had a way of making him forget, even for a few moments, the pain he carried. But Michael resisted at first. "I was afraid of making the same mistakes. Fear of opening your heart again and being betrayed." It was Sophie, with her innocence, who broke this barrier. "Daddy, I like it when Claire comes here. You smile more." It was at that moment that he realized that maybe he was ready to try again. Emily found out about their involvement. She didn't say anything directly, but Michael noticed by the shorter tone in the calls and the way she avoided talking about his life. Perhaps he still hoped there was a chance for reconciliation. But Michael knew that door had been closed. He no longer felt angry with her. Just pity. Too bad she threw away something so valuable. A few weeks later, Emily asked to meet him. He accepted, more out of respect for the history they shared than for any other reason. They met in a discreet café. Emily was visibly thinner and looked tired. "I just wanted to thank you for continuing to allow me to see Sophie," he said, stirring his coffee cup. "I know I don't deserve it." "She needs her mother," Michael replied. "I would never take that away from her." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I wish I could go back and undo everything." Michael took a deep breath. "I know. But we can't go back. We can only move forward." Emily looked up at him, tears welling up, but smiled slightly. "I hope you are happy, Michael. In truth. I also hope you find a way to be happy." They said goodbye with a handshake. It was the last significant meeting between the two. Over the next few months, Michael built a new routine. He and Claire began officially dating, and Sophie quickly became attached to her. Emily moved on however she could. He continued working, but remained distant from any relationship. He knew he needed to forgive himself first before he could think about loving again. As for Daniel, he disappeared from everyone's lives. Rumors said he had moved to another city and was trying to start from scratch. But for Michael, he no longer mattered. The past had left its marks, but it also opened space for a new beginning. And as he watched Sophie play in the backyard alongside Claire, Michael finally felt like he had found peace. If you've made it this far, be sure to comment what you thought of this story and which part impacted you the most. Your opinion is very important. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And remember, betrayal is not and will never be a solution. Thanks for listening and see you next time.